The email arrived at 3:14 a.m., an unwelcome guest in 17-year-old Lindsay's inbox. The subject line was simple: go to sleep. A shiver ran down her spine despite the summer heat. It was from an unknown address. The sender names a string of nonsensical characters. Curiosity, laced with a morbid fascination, gnawed at her. She clicked. The email contained a single image. A pale, gaunt face, stretched into a horrifying grin carved far too wide. The eyes, devoid of irises, held a chilling emptiness. Below, a single sentence in dripping red font: can't sleep. Neither can you. Panic clawed at Lindsay's throat. This wasn't a prank. This was a threat. Memories flooded back. The whispers about the disappearances plaguing their small town, teenagers vanishing from their beds, never to be seen again. The rumors of a deranged killer, a pale figure with a carved smile, leaving victims with the same chilling message scrawled on their walls: go to sleep. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Every rustle in the night, every creak of the floorboards, sent her heart hammering. Days blurred into nights. Exhaustion gnawed at her, but sleep evaded her. Then, another email arrived. This time, the image showed a house on her street, a familiar red swing set in the front yard. It was her neighbor's house, Mrs. Henderson's. Terror choked Lindsay. Mrs. Henderson lived alone, and her teenage grandson, Billy, had vanished just a week ago. The email confirmed her worst fears. Suddenly, a sickening thud echoed from the house next door. Adrenaline surged. Grabbing a baseball bat, Lindsay crept outside, her breath ragged. The back door of Mrs. Henderson's house hung open. Lindsay peered inside. In the living room, bathed in moonlight, stood the figure from the email. He wore a white hoodie, his face a grotesque mask of burnt flesh stretched into a permanent smile. He was carving the same message onto the wall: go to sleep. But something was different. He wasn't alone. On the floor, his back to Lindsay, lay Billy, his eyes wide with terror. The killer turned, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. He held a bloody knife, his voice raspy and inhuman. "Why are you awake?" he rasped. Lindsay screamed and lunged forward. The world became a blur of fear and adrenaline. The bat connected with a sickening crack, but the killer didn't falter. He lunged at her, his knife glinting in the moonlight. The struggle was brutal, short, and horrifying. Lindsay fought like a cornered animal, but the killer was inhumanly strong. The last thing she saw was his carved smile, inches from her face, as the world dissolved into darkness. The next morning, police found 2 bodies in Mrs. Henderson's house. A new email arrived in inboxes across town. The subject line remained the same: go to sleep. But this time, the picture was different. It was a picture of Lindsay, her face blank, lifeless, the same horrifying smile carved into her flesh. The legend of Jeff the Killer had a new chapter, and the town was about to learn the true meaning of sleepless nights. The email spread like a virus. Panic choked the town of Elmwood. Parents locked their doors, armed themselves with anything they could find: baseball bats, hunting rifles, holy water, just in case. Sleep deprivation gnawed at everyone's sanity. Meanwhile, in the silent woods bordering Elmwood, Jeff, the pale specter with a carved grin, reveled in the chaos. The fear fueled him, a twisted aphrodisiac. He relished the knowledge that sleep was their enemy, his weapon. His next target, however, was different. Ashley, Lindsay's best friend, was a firecracker, known for her quick wit and even quicker fists. She wouldn't go down without a fight. Ashley received the email, but unlike others, it didn't paralyze her. Anger, a white-hot fury, burned within her. She gathered her friends, a motley crew united by grief and rage. There was Mike, the football star with surprising tactical knowledge, Sarah, the goth girl with a hidden talent for lock-picking, and David, the computer whiz whose fingers flew across the keyboard, desperately searching for a digital trail. They formed a plan, a desperate gamble. Ashley, disguised with a hoodie and fake scars, would lure Jeff out. They rigged her house with makeshift traps and hidden cameras, a grim game of cat and mouse. Nightfall arrived, cloaking Elmwood in an oppressive darkness. Ashley sat alone, pretending to be asleep. Every creak of the floorboard sent shivers down her spine, but she held her ground. Then, a scraping sound at the window. Her heart hammered. There, silhouetted against the moon, stood Jeff. His smile seemed wider, crueler than before. He smashed the window and lunged. Ashley rolled away just in time. The house erupted in chaos. A hidden tripwire sent Jeff sprawling, a canister of pepper spray filling the air. He roared, blinded and enraged. Mike and Sarah burst out of hiding. Mike landed a solid blow with a baseball bat, but it seemed barely to faze Jeff. Sarah, agile and quick, darted around him, peppering his back with throwing knives. The cameras flickered to life, feeding the images to David, watching from a hidden location. He spotted something, a glint of metal on Jeff's wrist, a control panel for a hidden device strapped to his back. He yelled into his walkie-talkie, his voice hoarse with urgency, "Backpack. Destroy the backpack." Ashley, regaining her sight, saw the backpack. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just a killer, it was a bomb waiting to explode. She grabbed a fire extinguisher, aiming it at the straps. The ensuing fight was a ballet of violence. Jeff, blinded and maddened, slashed with his knife. Mike and Sarah, fueled by adrenaline, fought with desperate ferocity. Finally, with a desperate lunge, Ashley managed to blast the straps with the fire extinguisher. There was a deafening roar. The house shuddered. Smoke billowed through the shattered windows. When the dust settled, the only sound was Ashley's ragged breathing. Jeff was gone. The backpack, a mangled mess of wires and circuitry, lay smoldering on the floor. But was it over? Just then, a faint, distorted voice echoed from the wreckage, Jeff's voice, dripping with malice. "You think you've won?" it rasped. "Go to sleep." The house lights flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, Ashley screamed, a sound that pierced the night, a chilling reminder that the nightmare wasn't over. The game had just begun. The smoke stung Ashley's eyes as she stumbled out of the wreckage, her ears ringing. She collapsed onto the damp grass, gasping for air, the taste of acrid smoke stinging her throat. Sarah and Mike emerged, coughing and blinking through tear-filled eyes. David's frantic voice crackled through the walkie-talkie, a barrage of questions punctuated by his own ragged breaths. "Ashley, are you okay? Did you get him?" Ashley could only manage a weak groan. The adrenaline that had fueled her was fading fast, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and the chilling weight of uncertainty. Just then, a sound cut through the night, a high-pitched whine, growing louder with each passing second. Panic surged through them again. Sarah grabbed Ashley's arm, pulling her towards the tree limb. "Backpack." It must have triggered something, she screamed over the noise. They didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled through the undergrowth, the whine now a deafening shriek. Behind them, the house erupted in a blinding orange inferno. The shockwave from the blast sent them sprawling, the ground trembling beneath them. Ashley tasted dirt as she picked herself up. Her vision blurred with tears and smoke. Through the inferno's dying embers, she saw a figure emerge from the flames. Jeff, he was a horrific sight. His once pale skin was charred black, his hoodie hanging in shreds. But his eyes, those soulless black pits, burned with an unholy light. His carved smile seemed even wider, stretched to inhuman proportions by the fire. In his hand, he clutched a mangled metal object, the source of the wine, a detonator, its red button pulsing ominously. His voice, raspy and distorted by the flames, echoed through the night. "Go to sleep," he rasped, his voice dripping with venom. Mike lunged, a primal yell tearing from his throat. Jeff reacted with inhuman speed, the knife in his hand a blur. It connected with Mike's shoulder, carving a deep, sickening gash. Mike screamed, clutching at the wound as blood spurted between his fingers. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, saw an opening. With a swift movement, she snatched a fallen branch, its end sharpened to a deadly point. As Jeff turned his attention back to Ashley, Sarah lunged, driving the makeshift spear into his side. The effect was instantaneous. Jeff roared in pain, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The detonator clattered to the ground, the red button blinking mockingly. He ripped the spear out of his side, the metal tearing through flesh and bone in a sickening display of violence. He turned toward Sarah, his eyes burning with a murderous rage. But before he could reach her, Ashley, fueled by a desperate mix of grief and fury, launched herself at him. They grappled in the dirt, a tangled mess of limbs and screams. With a surge of strength, Ashley managed to pin Jeff down. She grabbed the fallen detonator, her fingers trembling. She looked into his eyes, a chilling reflection of her own fear and desperation staring back. "Go to sleep yourself," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Then, with a final, heart-wrenching scream, she slammed her thumb down on the red button. The world dissolved into a blinding white light, followed by a deafening roar. The ground lurched beneath them. Ashley squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end. Silence. When she opened her eyes, she was alone. Smoke and ash swirled around her, the only remnants of the house and the horrific battle that had just taken place. Her ears rang with a deafening silence. Mike lay a few feet away, unmoving. A choked sob escaped her lips as she scrambled towards him. He wasn't breathing. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of grief and horrifying relief. Then, a movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. A charred hand, with long, skeletal fingers, twitched from beneath a pile of burning debris. A single word, raspy and defiant, echoed through the smoke-filled air. "Awake." Ashley's scream died in her throat, a strangled gurgle of pure terror. The hand twitched again, then another, clawing its way out from under the debris. It was attached to a forearm, the charred flesh stretched taut over exposed bone. The grotesque appendage dragged itself towards a fallen tree branch, a makeshift weapon in this twisted game of survival. Panic clawed at Ashley's sanity. She couldn't stay here. Half dragging, half carrying Mike's lifeless body, she stumbled through the burning woods, the image of that clawing hand seared into her memory. David's frantic voice sputtered through the walkie-talkie, a beacon of hope in the desolate landscape. "Ashley. Where are you? Respond." She forced a cough, her voice hoarse. "Woods, east of the house, Mike." The words were ragged, barely audible over the crackling static. "Stay there. We're coming for you." David's voice held a desperate urgency. They pressed on, Ashley's vision blurring with exhaustion and smoke inhalation. Every rustle in the undergrowth sent shivers down her spine. The sound of snapping twigs behind them confirmed her worst fears. Jeff was alive. She looked down at Mike, his face pale and peaceful in death. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, a choked sob escaping her lips. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the night, a low, guttural growl. Jeff. He was close, a clearing emerged through the trees. In the distance, she saw headlights, a faint glimmer of hope. But the sound of snapping twigs was getting closer, accompanied by a sickening, wet rasping sound. Without a second thought, Ashley threw Mike's body over her shoulder, a surge of adrenaline pushing her forward, she burst into the clearing, collapsing onto the damp grass. Headlights flooded her vision, revealing David and Sarah in a beat-up pickup truck. Relief washed over her, so intense it almost made her knees buckle. "Get in!" David yelled, throwing open the passenger door. Ashley stumbled towards the truck, but a monstrous figure emerged from the darkness behind her. Jeff, or what remained of him, was a grotesque parody of a human being. His charred skin hung in strips, revealing raw muscle and bone beneath. One arm was a mangled mess, the other clutched a sharpened tree branch dripping with blood. His eyes, burning embers in the darkness, locked onto Ashley. "Go to sleep," he rasped, his voice a wet, gurgling sound. Sarah was already reaching out the truck window, grabbing Ashley's arm and pulling her in. Ashley kicked at Jeff with all her remaining strength, catching him in the chest. It sent him staggering back, momentarily stunned. Sarah slammed the door shut, David throwing the truck into gear. The tires spun on loose gravel, sending them fishtailing out of the clearing. Ashley looked back through the rear window. Jeff stood there, a monstrous silhouette bathed in the faint glow of the burning house. He raised the makeshift spear, a chilling scream tearing from his throat. Then, the truck rounded a bend, and he was gone. They didn't stop until they reached the deserted highway miles away, collapsing from exhaustion in the truck's cab. Dawn was breaking, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink. A new day, but would it bring them any peace? Ashley stared out at the empty road, the horrors of the night replaying in her mind. A choked sob escaped her lips. Mike was gone. And even though Jeff seemed vanquished, a part of her knew this wasn't over. The carved smile haunted her dreams, a chilling reminder that some nightmares refused to die. As the sun rose, casting its golden light on the ravaged landscape, one question echoed in the silence. Was she truly awake, or was this just another horrifying chapter in Jeff the Killer's twisted game? Days blurred into weeks. The attack left a permanent scar on Elmwood. The house fire, a beacon of the horrifying night, stood as a grim monument. Ashley, a shell of her former self, moved through life on autopilot. Nightmares plagued her sleep, a relentless loop of burning flesh and carved smiles. One morning, a notification on her phone jolted her awake. It was an email, the sender addressed the now dreaded string of nonsensical characters. The subject line, "Awake now," her heart hammered in her chest. The email contained a single image, a picture of the abandoned house, but this time, something was different. A figure stood on the roof, bathed in pale moonlight. It was Jeff. But he was different. His burned flesh seemed to have healed, replaced by a grotesque network of scar tissue. His carved smile, however, was wider than ever, stretching across his face like a crimson gash. Below the image, a single line of text, dripping with a digital blood effect. Round 2, terror choked Ashley. Jeff was alive, and he was coming back for her. Fueled by a desperate need for revenge and a sliver of hope for normalcy, Ashley contacted Sarah and David. They were wary, haunted by their own traumas, but they understood. This wasn't over. David, his tech skills honed by his obsession with uncovering Jeff's origins, discovered something chilling. The emails originated from a hidden server, a digital ghost haunting the abandoned internet. They tracked the location to an old, derelict mental asylum on the outskirts of town, a place whispered about in hushed tones, rumored to be the birthplace of Jeff's madness. The night of the full moon, they set out, armed with an arsenal of weapons, baseball bats, crowbars, a taser Sarah managed to procure, legally questionable, but desperate times. The asylum loomed before them, a gothic monstrosity shrouded in darkness. Its windows were like empty eyes, staring down at them with a malevolent coldness. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths and the echoing drip of unseen water. As they delved deeper, the walls closed in, plastered with chilling medical diagrams and cryptic scribbles. A sudden blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. Sarah. They rushed towards the sound, adrenaline surging through their veins. They found Sarah, pale and shaking, pointing to a cell. Through the barred window, a horrifying sight met their eyes. Jeff, strapped to a gurney, wires snaking from his body to a series of flickering machines. His eyes, however, were wide open, burning with a chilling intelligence. A single word escaped his lips, raspy and distorted: "Welcome, a trap." David cursed under his breath. The wires, he realized, weren't restraints. They were feeding something back into Jeff, amplifying his rage, his pain, turning him into a weapon. A monstrous voice boomed from the shadows, echoing through the halls. "You will witness the true power of madness." A hulking figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by shadows. In his hand, a bloody scalpel gleamed. He was the doctor, the architect of Jeff's horror. The fight was brutal. The doctor, wielding his scalpel with surgical precision, took a swipe at David, carving a deep gash across his arm. Sarah fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, but against the doctor's strength, she was outmatched. Ashley, fueled by a desperate rage, lunged at the doctor, smashing a crowbar into his back. He roared in pain, momentarily distracted. Using the opportunity, David grabbed a fire extinguisher, blasting the control panel feeding the machines holding Jeff. Sparks flew, the machines sputtered and died. Jeff, momentarily free from the electrical torment, ripped the remaining wires from his body, a guttural roar escaping his lips. He turned towards the doctor, his eyes burning with a terrifying mix of rage and hunger. "You wanted madness?" Jeff rasped, his voice a distorted echo. "Let's play." In the ensuing chaos, Ashley managed to grab Sarah and David, dragging them towards the exit. They didn't dare look back, the screams echoing in their ears a chilling symphony of violence. They burst out of the asylum, collapsing onto the damp grass. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. They were alive, but the victory tasted like ash in their mouths. As the sun rose, casting its golden light on the derelict asylum, a single, horrifying question hung heavy in the air: who escaped the asylum that night? The silence after their escape was a suffocating blanket. Exhausted and battered, they stumbled back to the car, each haunted by the sounds of the night. News reports later confirmed the doctor's demise, found mauled to death within the asylum walls, the cause of death listed as animal attack. But Ashley knew better. Days turned into weeks, then months. A semblance of normalcy returned to Elmwood, but not for Ashley, Sarah, and David. They were forever bound by their shared trauma, a chilling secret etched into their souls. Then, the nightmares began again. This time, however, they weren't just dreams. They were visions. Ashley would wake up in a cold sweat, the asylum walls seared into her memory. Sarah swore she could hear Jeff's raspy voice whispering her name in the dead of night. David, plagued by paranoia, became obsessed with monitoring the internet for any sign of Jeff's return. One evening, David's frantic call shattered the fragile peace. "Ashley. You need to see this," he panted, his voice choked with urgency. He sent her a link, a live feed from a hidden camera he'd managed to install inside the abandoned asylum. The flickering image showed a single room, barren except for a gurney in the center. A figure lay strapped down, its form obscured by darkness. Then, a flicker of movement. The figure stirred, a long, skeletal arm reaching up to brush against the camera lens. A horrifying grin, carved into pale, scarred flesh, filled the screen. Jeff's voice, distorted and amplified, echoed through the speakers. "Round 3, he rasped, his voice dripping with a chilling glee. "This time, you won't escape." The screen went black. Ashley's blood ran cold. Jeff was back, and he was stronger, fueled by the doctor's twisted experiments. They knew they couldn't run. This time, they had to face him head-on, armed with their knowledge of the asylum's layout, gleaned from David's obsessive research, and the desperate cocktail of fear and determination. They set out for a final confrontation. The asylum loomed before them, a grotesque monument to suffering, its silence more unsettling than any scream. As they ventured deeper, the air grew thick with a metallic tang, the smell of blood. Footsteps echoed in the musty hallways, each one a hammer blow against their already frayed nerves. Then, a guttural roar shattered the silence. They followed the sound, their weapons clutched tight, hearts pounding a frantic rhythm. The scene that greeted them was a tableau of horror. The asylum's main hall was littered with bodies, police officers, drawn to the scene by the doctor's demise, now victims of Jeff's insatiable rage. Jeff stood in the center, a monstrous figure illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the shattered windows. His once scarred flesh seemed to writhe and pulse with an unnatural energy. His carved smile was wider, stretching ear to ear, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. He turned toward them, his eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. "Welcome back," he rasped, his voice a distorted echo. "The fun is just beginning." The final fight was a whirlwind of violence. Sarah, fueled by a desperate need for revenge, launched herself at Jeff, slashing at him with a makeshift weapon fashioned from a broken pipe. David, his fear momentarily replaced by a cold, tactical focus, used the asylum's environment to his advantage, setting traps and ambushes. Ashley, however, knew this was more than just a physical battle. This was a fight for survival against a force fueled by madness. She needed to reach Jeff, the human being buried beneath the monster. As they fought, dodging Jeff's inhuman strength and razor-sharp claws, Ashley screamed, her voice a beacon of defiance. "Jeff! Remember who you are. Fight it." For a brief moment, a flicker of recognition crossed Jeff's eyes. But it was fleeting. The twisted entity controlling him roared back, lunging at Ashley. In a desperate maneuver, Ashley sidestepped his attack, shoving a vial Sarah had procured into his hand. It contained a powerful sedative, their last hope. Jeff roared in confusion, staring at the vial. For a moment, the fight seemed to stall, a tense standoff. Then, with a surge of strength, Jeff smashed the vial on the ground, its contents spraying onto the floor. He turned towards Ashley, a terrifying smile stretching across his face. "There's no escape from me," Jeff rasped, his voice a distorted echo bouncing off the asylum walls. His eyes, burning with a malevolent hunger, locked onto Ashley. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that the human Jeff was truly gone, but Ashley wasn't finished. She lunged, not at Jeff, but at a rusted fire sprinkler hanging from the ceiling. With a desperate swing of her crowbar, she shattered the sprinkler head. A torrent of water gushed down, drenching Jeff and the surrounding area. A scream ripped from his throat, a sound of pure agony. The electrical experiments had imbued his body with an unnatural resilience, but it had also made him vulnerable to water, the conductor for the residual energy coursing through him. He thrashed on the floor, his screams turning into a guttural, sizzling sound. The smell of burning flesh filled the air as the water shorted out the twisted network of scarred tissue beneath his skin. Sarah and David, momentarily stunned, watched as Ashley stood over the writhing figure, her face etched with a grim determination. Jeff's screams grew weaker, turning into a low, pathetic whimper. Then, silence. Ashley didn't move. She stared down at the charred husk that was once Jeff, the rain still pouring down, washing away the blood and the horror. Finally, she let out a shaky breath, the tension draining from her body. "It's over," she whispered, her voice hoarse. But as they turned to leave, a single, raspy voice echoed from the floor. Not yet. A single, skeletal arm twitched, the hand flexing its long, clawed fingers. Ashley's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But this time, they were prepared. They had faced the nightmare and emerged, battered but unbroken. With a steely glint in her eye, Ashley turned back to Jeff. This time, she wouldn't hesitate. Picking up the crowbar, she raised it high. Round 3, she whispered, a chilling echo of Jeff's own words, ends now. The final blow, delivered with a cold, unwavering determination, resonated through the asylum halls. The silence that followed held the promise of a new dawn, a dawn where they could finally try to heal, to rebuild their shattered lives. The nightmare of Jeff the killer might linger in their memories, but they had learned a horrifying truth. Sometimes, the only way to defeat the monsters is to become a monster yourself. But unlike Jeff, they would choose to walk away from the darkness, carrying the scars of their ordeal as a reminder of their strength, their resilience, and the price they paid for a nightmarish game of survival. The metallic tang of blood hung heavy in the air, a sickening counterpoint to the hiss of the sprinkler. Jeff, a writhing mess of charred flesh and exposed bone, convulsed on the floor. The water, once a symbol of hope, now sparked and crackled, turning the air electric. David, his face pale but resolute, grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher. "Water won't be enough," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "We need to overload him." His words sparked an idea in Sarah's eyes. She scrambled through the carnage, returning with a twisted metal rod, ripped from a shattered security gate. "We need to channel the current," she rasped, her knuckles white with the effort of holding back tears. Ashley, adrenaline coursing through her veins, understood. With trembling hands, she grabbed the exposed wires dangling from the broken sprinkler head. "On my count," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. 3, 2, 1, as one, Sarah plunged the metal rod into Jeff's writhing back, and Ashley slammed the exposed wires against the sprinkler head, completing the circuit. A blinding flash erupted, accompanied by a deafening crackle. Jeff's scream, a horrific symphony of pain and rage, cut short. His body stiffened, arched impossibly high, then slammed back down, a charred, smoking husk. The smell of burnt ozone filled the air, a nauseating yet strangely satisfying confirmation. Silence. A dreadful, heavy silence. They held their breath, waiting. But there was no movement, no twitch, no raspy whisper of defiance. Ashley, her legs shaking, stumbled back. David and Sarah rushed to her side, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and horror. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, the only sound the dripping of water echoing in the cavernous hall. Finally, David broke the silence. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it on Jeff's chest. No warmth, no pulse. Just a cold stillness. She let out a shaky breath. "It's over," she confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. Relief washed over them, a wave so powerful it threatened to drown them. They had survived. They had stopped the nightmare. But at what cost? The horrors of that night, the battles fought, the friends lost, these would forever scar their souls. Yet, as they emerged from the asylum, the first rays of dawn painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, a different feeling began to take root. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was a quiet sense of vindication. They had faced the darkness, stared into the abyss, and refused to be consumed. They had emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. As the sun rose, casting its golden light on the once foreboding asylum, a single word hung heavy in the air, a word that whispered of a future yet unwritten. Hope. The legend of Jeff the killer might live on in whispers and internet folklore, but for Ashley, Sarah, and David, the nightmare was finally over. They had taken back the night, and in doing so, found a glimmer of light in the darkness. They had not just survived, they had overcome.